A mother wolf asks tourists for help. What they found will break your heart. What would make a wild animal, a symbol of primitive fear and freedom, approach a human being and beg for help? This question never crossed Alexei Sokolov's mind. He came to the Taiga Zavod Reserve for peace and quiet. To turn off his phone, forget about pressing deadlines and endless meetings. He just wanted to walk through the forest, listen to the birds singing, and feel like a good father who had taken his family out into nature. His wife Olga seemed to have a different goal. Her camera clicked incessantly, capturing every leaf, every caterpillar. Her attentive eyes were not looking for peace, but for a story. Their 10-year-old son Misha just wanted adventure. Real adventure, not the kind you read about in books. The July sun shone through the thick pine trees, creating bizarre patterns of light and shadow on the path. The air was thick, smelling of rotten pine needles and warm resin. Alexei was already beginning to feel a pleasant tiredness in his legs and the very rejuvenation he had come for. He was just about to suggest taking a break when Misha froze and grabbed his arm. The boy didn't say a word. He just pointed ahead, where the trail curved around a group of moss-covered boulders. There stood a wolf. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested to know where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's begin. Alexei's first reaction was fear. Cold, primal, making his heart skip a beat. He instinctively shielded Misha with his body and backed away, looking for Olga. She was standing a little behind him, and her reaction was completely different. Instead of retreating, she slowly, without any sudden movements, raised her camera. The wolf did not growl. It did not bare its teeth. It just stood about 20 meters away and stared at them. It was a she-wolf. Skinny, with sunken sides and dull, matted fur. She didn't look angry. There was something else in her yellow eyes. Something Alexei couldn't and didn't want to understand. It was like she was waiting for something. Olga, already looking at the beast through a long focus lens, whispered, barely breathing, "Lesha, she's alone, and she's strange." The she-wolf took a step, then another, but not toward them, toward the thicket. She moved a couple of meters away, stopped, and turned around. Her gaze was fixed on the people. She whimpered softly, almost inaudibly. The sound was not at all threatening. It was full of longing and something else. Pleading. Alexei felt a chill run down his spine, no longer from fear, but from bewilderment. "Let's go. Right now," he said firmly. But Misha, peeking out from behind him, whispered spellbound, "Dad, she's calling us." The she-wolf turned again and, limping on her front paw, disappeared behind the trees. They returned to the tourist base in oppressive silence. The administrator, a heavy-set man with a tired face, listened to Alexei's rambling story with poorly concealed indifference. "Wolves? Yes, they're around. You were lucky she didn't come closer. Anything can happen in the wild. The main thing is to stay on the trail, and everything will be fine." His words were logical, but they didn't answer his questions. They didn't explain the animal's gaze. In the evening, in their small wooden house, Olga uploaded the photos to her laptop. "Look," she called to her husband. On the big screen, the wolf looked even more pitiful. Olga enlarged the image. "See? Her ribs are sticking out. Her fur is in terrible condition. And here, on her side, that's not dirt. It looks like some kind of stain, like from chemicals." Alexei stared at the screen. He was a pragmatist, a programmer. For him, the world consisted of code, logic, and understandable algorithms. The wolf's behavior didn't fit into that. Maybe she's just old and sick all. Rabies, for example. Rabid animals are aggressive. They attack. But this one was asking for something. I could feel it. Misha, who had been silently drawing in the corner, came over and looked at the screen. She was very sad, he said, as if something had happened to her. The next day, Olga insisted on finding the gamekeeper. His name was Viktor Gromov. His house stood on the outskirts of town and contained nothing superfluous. Everything served a strict purpose. Viktor himself was a match for his dwelling. He was over 50, his face was covered with a network of deep wrinkles, and his eyes looked at the world with a heavy, long-standing cynicism. He listened to them, leaning against the doorframe and crossing his powerful arms over his chest. "City folk," he muttered, not addressing anyone in particular. "Every year it's the same thing. First they have a dancing seal, then a squirrel reading poetry. We're not crazy," Olga snapped. "Here, see for yourself." She handed him the camera. Viktor reluctantly took it. He flipped through the pictures, enlarging the image with his calloused finger. Not a single muscle moved on his face, but his gaze lingered on the photo longer than Alexei expected. He silently returned the camera. "Stay away from the animals, and don't go anywhere except the permitted routes. The forest doesn't forgive mistakes." He was about to close the door, but Olga stopped him. She was limping, and she was calling us to follow her. Viktor froze. He looked at Olga with a long, heavy gaze. Something in her words seemed to pierce the armor of his indifference. "I'll check," he said curtly, and slammed the door shut. Left alone, Viktor went over to the large map of the reserve hanging on the wall. The place the tourists had described, an old copper mine, abandoned 20 years ago. It was supposed to be reclaimed, but, as usual, the money had disappeared somewhere on the way from the regional center. It was a bad place. He grabbed his well-worn rifle and backpack and left the house. An hour later, he was already there. The Sokolov family's footprints on the trail were fresh, but he saw something else nearby. Wolf paw prints. He followed them. Viktor was the best tracker in the area. He could read the forest like an open book. These tracks told him a story. Here, the she-wolf had stood for a long time, looking at the trail. Here she had taken a few steps to the side and then returned. Her gait was uneven. She was indeed weak. He went further, deeper into the forest, and soon he stumbled upon something that made him curse under his breath. Deep ruts from an ATV. Here, in the heart of a protected area. And 100 meters further on, he found what he was looking for. An old, rusty but still functional snare trap tied to a young tree. Poachers. A dark rage began to boil inside him. He hated them more than anything else in the world. A few years ago, the same bastards had killed his partner, a young guy who had stumbled upon their camp. Viktor had found them then. And since then, his war with them had become personal. He returned to base at dusk, angry and silent. Thoughts of the she-wolf faded into the background. Now he had a more understandable and familiar goal. But the next morning, everything changed. Misha's scream made Alexei and Olga rush out onto the porch of their house. The she-wolf was standing in the clearing in front of the base, about 50 meters away. This time she wasn't just strange. She was desperate. She was breathing heavily, her sides heaving. Her limp grew worse, and she could barely put any weight on her front paw. She paid no attention to the other tourists who were peering fearfully out of the windows. Her yellow eyes were fixed on only one cabin, the Sokolov family. She took a few steps forward, whimpered, this time loudly, desperately, and looked back toward the forest. It was no longer an invitation. It was a plea. At that moment, Viktor stepped out into the clearing. He walked slowly toward the Sokolov's house, his eyes fixed on the wolf. His face was a mixture of surprise and grim determination. He had seen a lot, but never anything like this. An animal driven to the brink had overcome all its instincts and come to its worst enemy for help. "She won't back down," Viktor said quietly, his voice hoarse. "She came for you." He slung his carbine over his shoulder and checked the pouch on his belt. Then he looked straight into Alexei and Olga's eyes. There was no cynicism left in his gaze, only grim necessity. "Are you coming?" Viktor's question hung in the morning air, thick and heavy as tar. It was not a suggestion. It was a sentence, a challenge thrown in the face of their comfortable city life. Alexei was the first to break the silence. "No," he exhaled, grabbing Olga by the elbow. "This is madness. Viktor, you're a gamekeeper. You have a gun. It's your job. We're tourists. We have a child." He looked at Misha, who, contrary to his expectations, was not afraid. The boy was looking at the she-wolf with such intense sympathy that Alexei's heart ached. Olga gently freed her hand. "We have to, Lesha." Her voice was quiet but firm as steel. "We can't just stand here. She came for us. For us. Do you understand?" She turned to the gamekeeper. "We're going." Viktor nodded, as if he hadn't expected any other answer. His gaze slid over Alexei. "Leave the child here." "I'll go," Misha said unexpectedly loudly. "She's not afraid of me. I'm not afraid of her either." Viktor crouched down in front of the boy. Something like respect flashed in his stern eyes for a moment. "This isn't a game, kid. It's real out there in the woods. It can be dangerous." "I know," Misha replied stubbornly, "but I'm going." Alexei wanted to argue, to shout that it was absurd, that he wouldn't allow it. But he looked at his wife, at his son, at the sullen gamekeeper, and realized that the wheels were already in motion. He was the only one resisting the inevitable. Giving in, he sighed heavily. "All right. But if I say back, we turn around. That's it. No arguments." Viktor straightened up. "My rules," he said curtly. "I'll do the talking. Follow me step by step. Don't step on dry branches. Stay close to me. Questions later. Is that clear to everyone?" He didn't wait for an answer. Seeing that the people were following her, the she-wolf let out a quiet sound, like a sigh of relief, and, turning around, slowly wandered toward the edge of the forest. She kept looking back to make sure her strange rescuers weren't falling behind. Viktor walked first, his rifle resting on the crook of his elbow. The gamekeeper's movements were smooth and predatory. He walked almost silently, his eyes constantly scanning the space around him. Behind him, trying to copy his gait, walked Olga with her camera at the ready. Alexei and Misha brought up the rear. Alexei felt ridiculous and out of place in his bright jacket. Every step was difficult. Every branch that whipped his face felt like a personal insult. They left the well-trodden tourist trail and plunged into the real forest. There were no signposts or convenient bridges over the streams. Only windbreaks, thick bushes, and damp, springy ground underfoot. The air changed. It became denser, smelling of dampness, mushrooms, and something else. Something barely perceptible and disturbing. The she-wolf led them confidently, choosing the shortest but not the easiest path. She bypassed impassable thickets, but forced them to climb slippery slopes and wade through cold, fast-flowing streams. After an hour, Alexei was completely exhausted. His city endurance had dried up. Olga was also breathing heavily, but her eyes were burning with excitement. She took pictures as she went, capturing every step of their incredible journey. Only Misha and Victor seemed unaffected by fatigue. The boy clung to his father's backpack and walked silently, his childish face serious and focused. Victor, on the other hand, was part of this forest. He moved as if he had been born here. At one point, the she-wolf stopped. She sank heavily to the ground, her chest heaving with labored breathing. She looked at the people, and there was such mortal agony in her gaze that Alexei looked away. Olga, on the contrary, moved closer, as far as caution would allow, and took several close-ups. "Victor, is she wounded?" she whispered. The gamekeeper approached and crouched down, peering at the animal. "No wounds," he concluded. "Looks like exhaustion. Or something else." He looked in the direction they had been walking. "We're almost there. It's an old quarry. Not a good place." He took a flask out of his backpack and handed it to Olga. "Drink. Everyone take a sip." The water was ice-cold and tasted of metal, but it restored some of their strength. They walked for another 40 minutes. The forest around them began to change. Healthy, powerful pine trees gave way to stunted, twisted birches. Stones with reddish veins began to appear more and more often under their feet. The air also changed. The faint, disturbing smell that Alexei had noticed earlier grew stronger. Now he could identify it. It was a faint but distinct chemical smell. It was as if a canister of solvent had been spilled somewhere far away. Victor sensed it too. He stopped and sniffed the air. His face grew even darker. "Poachers," he growled. "They've gotten bold. Maybe they're cooking something right here in the forest." This thought frightened Alexei much more than the she-wolf. A wild animal was one thing, but armed and unpredictable people were another. "Maybe we should go back?" he asked hopefully. "It's too late," Victor replied curtly. "Look." He pointed ahead. A clearing appeared through the trees. The ground was bare, gray-yellow, strewn with stones. It was the edge of an abandoned quarry, a huge scar left by man on the body of the earth. The she-wolf gathered her last strength, got up, and took a few steps toward the edge of this ugly pit. She led them there. She stopped at the foot of a huge pine tree that had been uprooted, its giant roots intertwined to form a dark crevice that looked like the entrance to a cave. This was her lair. The she-wolf turned to the people. She was no longer whimpering. She just stared at them, breathing heavily. Her mission was accomplished. She had done everything she could. Now it was their turn. Victor slowly moved forward, taking the carbine from his shoulder. Alexei, Olga, and Misha followed him. The closer they got to the lair, the stronger the chemical smell became. It mixed with another, sweetish, nauseating smell. The smell of decay. At the very entrance to the crevice, on the trampled grass, lay something small and motionless. A gray-brown lump of fur. Victor froze and lowered his weapon. Olga gasped and covered her mouth with her hand to keep from screaming. Alexei instinctively covered Misha's eyes, but the boy had already seen it. It was a wolf cub. It lay on its side, its tiny legs stretched out unnaturally. It was dead. A quiet, plaintive whimper came from the depths of the dark lair. There was someone else there. Someone alive. Viktor Gromov didn't say a word. He slowly lowered his rifle to the ground, his stern face momentarily losing its stony impenetrability, replaced by an expression of deep, long-standing grief. He had seen death many times, but the death of a child always felt wrong, like a piece torn out of the book of nature. Olga covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. The click of her camera sounded deafening in the dead silence, almost sacrilegious. She took pictures because she didn't know what else to do. It was her way of screaming. Alexei pulled Misha toward him, trying to turn him away from the terrible sight. But the boy resisted. He stared at the dead wolf cub with wide, unblinking eyes. In his child's world, where wolves were strong and brave heroes of stories, there was no place for such a scene. The mother wolf was breathing heavily, lying on the ground and not taking her eyes off the people. She no longer begged. She waited. "Stay here," Victor ordered hoarsely. He left his rifle by the tree and took a powerful flashlight out of his pocket. Taking a deep breath, he crouched down and stepped into the dark hole under the roots. His figure disappeared into the darkness. For those who remained outside, agonizing seconds of waiting began. All that could be heard was the rustling of leaves, their own heavy breathing, and a faint, intermittent whimpering from under the ground. It grew quieter and quieter, like a dying flame. Alexei felt his heart pounding wildly. He cursed himself for giving in to Olga's persuasion, for bringing his son here. All his instincts screamed that he should run away, back to the safe and familiar world of asphalt and concrete. Olga lowered the camera. She listened to the silence, her face a mask of suffering. She felt the pain of this she-wolf as if it were her own. Finally, Victor appeared. He moved slowly, cautiously, as if carrying something fragile. In his hands was a tiny body, another wolf cub. It was alive, but barely. Its small body trembled in death throes, its head falling back limply. Victor stepped into the light and knelt down carefully, placing the cub on the grass. "There's another one," he said hoarsely, looking at Olga. "Dead. The whole pack." The mother wolf slowly raised her head and crawled closer. She nudged her last living child with her nose, sniffed him, and whimpered softly. It was the sound of utter defeat. Victor wasn't looking at the wolves. His gaze was fixed on the ground. He ran his fingers through the fur of the dying wolf cub, then sniffed his fingers. His face froze. He stood up and took a few steps toward a small stream that wound lazily just a couple of meters from the den, flowing from somewhere near the quarry. The water in the stream was clear, but a thin, barely noticeable iridescent film floated on its surface. The grass on the banks was withered and unnaturally yellow, although a few meters from the water, everything was green. Victor crouched down by the water. "It's not poachers," he said so quietly that Alexei had to come closer to hear him. "And it's not a disease." He scooped up a handful of water and immediately poured it out. An oily residue remained on his palm. "Chemicals," he concluded. "A quarry. Someone is using it as a dump. Some kind of waste. This crap has seeped into the groundwater. It's poisoned the stream." He glanced at the dead grass, the iridescent film on the water, the dying wolf cub. They drank this water, all their food, everything they touched was poisoned. Olga slowly raised her camera. Now her movements were precise and measured. She filmed everything: the water, the ground, the dead wolf cub at the entrance, the dying cub in Victor's arms as he lifted it up again. She took close-ups of the iridescent film, the oily stains on the cub's fur. She understood. These weren't just photographs. They were evidence. At that moment, everything became clear. The wolf's behavior, her exhaustion, her desperate limp. She was losing her family. Her mate, the strong leader, had probably fallen first. Then the cubs began to die, one after another, from an invisible enemy that could not be killed or driven away. Something was killing them from within. And she, driven to the brink, did the impossible. She went to ask for help from those she had feared all her life. She brought them here, to her dying offspring, hoping for a miracle. But there would be no miracle. Alexei looked at this scene, and his heart ached with icy horror and shame. It wasn't wild nature that was cruel. It was the person who, somewhere far away, in warmth and comfort, decided to save money on disposal and simply poured poison into an abandoned pit in the forest. The last wolf cub in Victor's arms twitched. Its little body stretched out and went limp. It was all over. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream. But it was broken by the mother wolf. She raised her head to the sky and let out a howl. It was not a battle cry or a call to the pack. It was a long, drawn-out, heart-wrenching cry. The cry of a mother over the bodies of her children. The wolf's howl filled the entire space. It penetrated the skin, vibrated in the air, and made the blood run cold. There was no aggression in it, only bottomless, all-consuming grief. Alexei instinctively covered his ears, but it didn't help. The sound seemed to come from inside. Misha pressed himself against him, his whole body trembling. Olga stood motionless, her face wet with tears, but she continued to film. She was recording this tragedy, feeling that she had to do it. She owed it to this mother, whose grief was as universal and understandable as the grief of any human woman. Victor slowly and carefully laid the last wolf cub's body on the ground, next to the first one. He didn't look at the she-wolf. He looked at the quarry. His face was like a storm cloud. The rage that had been building up inside him for years, the rage against the poachers, the indifferent officials, the tourists who left trash behind, all found its focus. It was evil in its purest, most concentrated form. Evil that wore no mask, had no face, but killed as effectively as a bullet. When the howling subsided, the she-wolf slowly rose to her feet. She walked around her dead children, sniffing each one. Then she raised her head and looked at the people. Her yellow eyes were empty. There was no longer any supplication, hope, or even hatred in them. Only a burnt-out emptiness. She turned, and without looking back, walked away from her ravaged lair. Her limping gait was that of a ghost. She simply dissolved among the trees, leaving behind a deafening silence and 3 small, lifeless bodies. No one knew how long they stood there. Time stood still. Victor was the first to come to his senses. He approached Olga. "I need your photos," he said in a hollow, firm voice. "All of them. Especially the water, the ground, the wolf cub's fur. They're evidence. I'll write a report. I'll take water and soil samples." Olga nodded silently and handed him the flashcard from her camera. "We have to go," Alexei said. His voice was shaking. He felt dirty, complicit in this crime simply by virtue of being human. He took Misha by the hand. "Let's go, son." Misha didn't resist. He was unnaturally quiet. His adventure was over before it had even begun. It turned into a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life. The road back seemed endless. No one spoke. Everyone was lost in their own thoughts. Alexei wondered how he would explain to his son what he had seen. Olga thought about how her photos, taken for beauty, had become a chronicle of a crime. Victor wondered how he could get the sluggish, bureaucratic machine to work. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Cases like this often get bogged down in offices and slowed down, especially if there are people with money and connections behind them. But looking at his clenched jaw and eyes burning with rage, Alexei somehow believed that this man would not back down. Back at the base, they immediately packed their things. The atmosphere of relaxation was irretrievably poisoned. The administrator, Seeing their gloomy faces and learning that they were leaving a day early, merely shrugged. Their story, as Alexei recounted it haltingly, made no impression on him. A quarry? Who knows what's there? It's been abandoned for 100 years. It's a pity, of course, for the wolves. But that's nature, natural selection. These words caused Olga to fly into a fit of rage. Natural selection? She hissed. That's murder, and you all pretend that nothing is happening. She turned and walked to the car, slamming the door. The drive to the city was filled with heavy silence. Misha slept in the back seat, his face tense in his sleep. Alexei drove on autopilot, the image repeating itself over and over in his mind. The dead wolf cubs, the mother's howls, the rainbow film on the water. He had come to the forest to escape his problems, only to be confronted with a problem of such magnitude that it made all his work deadlines seem ridiculous and insignificant. He looked at Olga. She was sitting with her back to him, staring out the window, and he knew she wasn't just looking at the trees flashing by. She was thinking, and that scared him. He knew his wife. Her keen sense of justice would not allow her to simply forget about this. A week later, Victor called them. His voice sounded tired but determined. The examination has confirmed it, he said without preamble. Hundreds of times the limit for copper, zinc, and some other junk. It's poison. I wrote a report and sent it to the regional office. I attached your photos. They can't ignore it. And what? Olga asked. She heard a bitter smile in Victor's voice. Nothing yet. They sent the paper to the district prosecutor's office. They started an investigation. It could take months or years, unless we push them. What can we do? Alexei asked. Nothing. You are witnesses. If they call you, give your testimony. And I'll be here. Make sure they don't bury this case. He paused. By the way, the farmer from the neighboring village whose livestock died, remember I told you about him? The stream from the quarry flows into the river where he watered his cows. He also filed a complaint. Now there are at least 2 of us. He said goodbye and hung up. After that conversation, Olga changed. She sat at her computer for hours, editing those photos. She turned them black and white, removing everything unnecessary and leaving only the essence. Pain, despair, and accusation. She contacted an old friend, the owner of a small but trendy gallery in the city center. She told him the story. He was shocked. You have to show this, he said. People need to see this. A month later, a photo exhibition opened. It was simply called The Cry. Large black and white photographs hung in a small hall. Here, a thin wolf looks at the viewer with a silent plea. There was her paw, frozen in a limping step. There was the iridescent film on the dark water. There was the dead wolf cub, curled up in a ball, as if asleep. And in the center was the main photograph. The wolf's muzzle was thrown back toward the sky in a silent howl. The exhibition had the effect of a bomb going off. First, several internet blogs wrote about it. Then television journalists arrived. The story of the wolf asking humans for help and the terrible discovery spread across the internet. The hashtag Jusser Krik Volchitsi, the wolf's cry, trended. People were shocked. They left hundreds of angry comments, demanding that the culprits be found and punished. The indifference that the criminals had counted on cracked. The public outcry proved to be a force that even the most inert officials could not ignore. The story that began with a quiet trip by one family turned into a high-profile case that the whole country was following. The phone in the Sokolov's apartment rang nonstop. Journalists, activists, and concerned citizens all wanted to know the details. The prosecutor's office, which had previously been conducting a half-hearted investigation, suddenly became very active. An investigative team arrived at the reserve. Alexei and Olga were summoned several times to give testimony. Each time, they patiently recounted everything they had seen. Olga's photographs, black and white and merciless, became the main, irrefutable evidence. They spoke louder than any words. However, it was Victor who played the decisive role. While investigators in clean shoes questioned witnesses in the city, the gamekeeper did his job in the forest. Public attention gave him free rein. He combed every inch around the quarry, finding more and more clues. He talked to old people in the surrounding villages, gathering rumors and gossip. And one detail, which he initially considered insignificant, came back to him. A couple of years ago, a new furniture factory had opened in the area. Business was booming, and the owner, a certain Mr. Shirokov, quickly became a respected figure, sponsoring local festivals and even running for district council. Victor remembered how one of his hunter friends bragged that he had gotten a job with Shirokov as a dump truck driver. He hauled all kinds of trash at night. "He pays well and asks few questions," he said at the time. Victor passed this information on to the investigator who was handling the case. The investigator, pressured by calls from above, took the tip seriously. A check of the furniture factory's documents revealed glaring discrepancies. According to the paperwork, they were spending huge sums of money on the disposal of toxic paints and solvents. But the disposal company turned out to be a one-day wonder, registered under a fake name. The circle began to tighten. One night, the task force caught the same dump truck red-handed as it was heading to an abandoned quarry loaded with barrels of toxic liquid. The driver, the same man Victor knew, cracked under the first interrogation. He turned everyone in. Shirokov, the man who had ordered the killings and the scheme they had been operating for years. Saving money on disposal had brought the businessman millions. The price of those millions was a poisoned river, dead livestock, and the lives of a small pack of wolves. Shirokov's arrest made headlines. His respectable image was shattered. The trial was quick and exemplary. The factory owner received a real prison sentence. The Taiga Zavod Nature Reserve received a claim for damages and a program for the reclamation of the quarry. Justice seemed to have prevailed. But for the Sokolovs, this victory had a bitter taste. Their lives would never be the same again. Alexei quit his high-paying but meaningless job. He threw himself into organizing the foundation that he and Olga had created with the money from the sale of her photographs. The foundation helped gamekeepers like Victor and fought environmental crimes in small regions. He found this more meaningful than any of his previous projects. Olga became the voice of those who could not speak. Her camera was no longer searching for beautiful landscapes. It was searching for the truth. She traveled around the country, filming stories about people and animals who had suffered from human greed and indifference. Misha also changed. He no longer sought adventure. He could spend hours poring over books about nature, drawing animals, and in the summer, he persuaded his parents to volunteer at a wildlife rehabilitation center. The tragedy in the forest did not break him, but made him stronger and wiser beyond his years. One autumn, Victor called them again. "The quarry has been fenced off," he said. "The workers have arrived. They're going to remove the earth. It will take 10 years, but at least they've started." He paused. "I was here, on the far border. I saw a she-wolf. Just one. Maybe it was her. Maybe not. Who knows?" He didn't say another word, but Olga understood. The mother wolf had survived, and her story, her cry, became a legend that was now told in the reserve. A legend about how nature can endure a lot. But sometimes, When pushed to the limit, it comes for help. And woe to those who do not hear its call. Their short summer vacation, which began as an attempt to escape reality, confronted them with its most brutal side. But after going through this hell, they found something more important than peace and quiet. They found themselves. This story is not about wolves. It is about you and me, about the choices each of us makes every day. To walk by or intervene, to remain silent or shout out. Ultimately, these decisions determine the kind of world we will live in. Who do you think is primarily responsible for the tragedy in this story? The businessman who gave the order to dump the waste? Or the system that allowed him to do so and turned a blind eye to the problem for years?